As promised, 6.2 review. Here it comes. Okay, in this section we evaluate polynomial functions. And here we have this function notation. If r of x equals 2x to the fourth minus 5x squared plus x minus 1, r of x is just like the notation that we learned previously, f of x. It's just a different letter than f. So that really means r as a function of x. We can think of that as y equals 2x to the fourth minus 5x squared plus x minus 1. And the question here is find r of 3. To find r of 3, we just replace each x with 3. So we get 2 times 3 to the fourth minus 5 times 3 squared plus 3 minus 1. Okay, 3 to the fourth, 3 times 3 is 9, times another 3 times 3 is 81. So we have 2 times 81 minus 5 times 9, 3 squared, plus 3 minus 1. And if we plug that into a calculator or do it by hand, 2 times 81, 162, minus 45, plus 3 minus 1, you end up getting 119. And that evaluating functions is pretty simple. Just replace the x with the value. So we're going to move on to adding and subtracting polynomials. Now actually this is really a review of something we've already been doing. To add and subtract polynomials, we just add and subtract the like terms. And I start with an example that's sort of like 4 in the homework. 3x cubed plus 2x minus 1 added to the polynomial 2x cubed minus 2x minus 2. Now when you're adding polynomials, you can just drop those parentheses. And the signs stay the same. And then we can even regroup. 3x cubed plus 2x cubed plus 2x minus 2x minus 1 minus 2. And by adding the like terms together, we get 5x cubed. 2x minus the 2x makes 0 x's, minus 1, and then minus 2 makes minus 3. So our answer is 5x cubed minus 3. So we're going to move on to subtracting polynomials. And actually you've done some of this as well, where you subtracted in the process of solving for an equation. You maybe had parentheses and you subtract. And if you remember how we did that with the equations, when we have this minus sign, that's like plus a negative 1 times all of those quantities inside the second parentheses. So it's like we're distributing a negative 1 through that second set of parentheses. When we do that, we get plus a negative 4x squared. Negative 1 times negative 3x is plus 3x. Negative 1 times negative 3 is plus 3. So once we distribute that minus sign through correctly, we can then add like terms. And the thing to remember when you're subtracting polynomials, what you end up doing is adding the opposite of each term inside the parentheses. We add a negative 4x squared, a positive 3x, and a positive 3. Opposite of each term is added. Okay, now we combine like terms. 4x squared and negative 4x squared makes 0x squared. 3x plus 3x makes 6x. And 3 plus 3 makes 6. And that's our answer, 6x plus 6. Okay, so I'm going to have you do this one on your own. So it's time to pause the video and give this a try on your own. Subtract these two polynomials and simplify by combining like terms. So when we're subtracting the polynomial negative 3x squared minus 4x, it's in those parentheses, we end up adding the opposite of each term. We end up adding a positive 3x squared and a positive 4x. Or the other way of thinking of this is that we're taking a negative 1 and distributing through, and we're adding the result of that, which is positive 3x squared, positive 4x. Then combine like terms. 5x squares, 3x squares makes 8x squares. A negative 2x plus 4x makes a positive 2x. There's nothing to combine with the 4, so we just write plus 4, and that's our answer. Okay, now I'm going to have you do a review problem, solving a linear equation. It's some of the same concepts we've just worked with, where we're subtracting like terms and distributing a negative sign. We've done these in the past. So solve this linear equation for x. Get all the x's alone, the numbers on the other side, and then divide or multiply to solve. So pause the video and try this one on your own. And if you forgot how to start this, I'll start you out. You start by distributing 2 times x, 2 times 3, then negative 3 times x, negative 3 times 1. So that's how you start. And that gives you 2x plus 6 minus 3x minus 3 equal a half. Then you combine your like terms and solve from there. So if you haven't done that already, solve it from here and then come back, pause the video, and then check back. Okay, so combining like terms, 2x minus 3x is negative 1x. 6 minus 3 is 3. We want all the x's alone, so we do that by subtracting 3 on both sides. And I'm just using this shorthand notation, minus 3 minus 3. Negative 1x equals 1/2 minus 3. Now, if you're going to combine 1/2 and 3, you need a common denominator. So we write 3 as 3 over 1. And then we have to multiply 3 over 1 times 2 times 2. So the 3 over 1 becomes negative 6 over 2. So negative 1x equals 1/2 minus 6/2. Or negative 1x equals 1 minus 6, negative 5/2. We're almost done. Now what we have to do is either multiply both sides by negative 1 or divide both sides by negative 1. It doesn't matter which one you do. I kind of like multiplying both sides by negative 1. And when you do that, the negative x turns into positive x. The negative 5/2 turns into positive 5/2. So our answer is x equals positive 5/2. And one last review problem. Take 3/11 minus 2/5 plus 1/2 and evaluate that sum and difference. And write as a fraction. So show all the fraction operations. And of course, in order to add or subtract fractions, you need a common denominator, preferably a least common denominator. So see if you can do this on your own. Pause the video. Okay, and a common denominator will always equal the product of the denominators. 11 times 5 times 2, which is 10 times 11, 110. However, and I've mentioned this in class, if the denominators do not share a common factor, that product is also the least common denominator. Is there any number that divides into any two of these? 11 and 5 are prime numbers, and 2 is as well. They're all prime numbers, so they don't have any common factors. That means that product is also the least common denominator, which is kind of nice. But it's a nice rule to remember. If the denominators do not share a common factor, automatically the product of the denominators is the least common denominator. So you have this least common denominator. Now you have to rewrite all the fractions with that least common denominator and combine them. So the 3/11ths we have to multiply by 10 over 10. How do I know that? Well, our least common denominator is 5 times 2 times 11. We're missing the 5 times 2, the 10. 2/5, we have the 5, but we're missing the factors of 11 times 2, which is 22. And the 1/2, we're missing the 5 times 11, which is 55. So we get 30 1/10 minus 44 1/10 plus 55 1/10. Adding and subtracting from left to right, remember your order of operations. 30 minus 44 is negative 14. Negative 14 added to 55 is 41. So our answer is 41 110ths. Okay, well that's it for 6.2. Any questions on 6.1 and 6.2? Post them in discussions. I will answer them if you post them.